Hello, everybody. This is Sam Carchidi from Philly Hockey Now, and welcome to our 15th episode of our Broad Street Bullcast. And we talk all Flyers here. We take a lot of questions from the fans. But before we talk hockey, it's amazing what's going on across the street, where the Phillies have captivated this city, much like the Flyers did in 1974, 1975, and on. And the vibe you get from the Phillies right now and this city is what it was like for the Flyers, believe it or not, in the 70s and even into the 80s. And for younger fans out there who probably have suffered through the Flyers and winning just one playoff series over the last 10 years, you're probably amazed to believe that this city was in love with the Flyers, and they were the number one team, believe it or not, at that time among the four Philadelphia sports teams. But anyway, the Phillies run, I think, is actually helping everybody else. It's taking the pressure off the Flyers anyway. Their start, the attention is all on the Phillies and, of course, the Eagles as well. But the Flyers have overachieved greatly, and I think part of that is because they're not under the microscope as much. And I want to talk about some of the Flyers' positives. They're off to a 5-2-2 start, heading into Wednesday's game in Toronto. And I think if you're a Flyers fan, you would have signed up for 5-2-2 before the season, especially with the lineup that has been missing Ryan Ellis, Sean Couturier, Cam Atkinson, James Van Riemsdyk for a lot of games now. And so props to the Philadelphia Flyers. Props to John Tortorella. John Tortorella is another positive, and he's a big one. He's gotten the most out of his players. They work hard. They play with grit. They're well-conditioned. They've won most of the third periods this year. And Tortorella is also a realist. I mean, he talked after a 1-0 overtime loss in New York on Tuesday. He talked about, hey, we're going to have to get Carter Hart to steal some games for us, and we're going to have to win some of these ugly games, because he didn't say this, but basically what he was saying, if you read between the lines, the talent just is not there right now with all these injuries that have taken place. And he said hopefully some of these guys will come back soon, and that will, turn the tables a little bit, because the Flyers are being really badly outshot, badly outchanced. And their 5-2-2 record, as I mentioned, is really quite stunning if you look at the numbers. I mentioned Carter Hart. He has been maybe the number one positive. He has a .943 save percentage. Can he sustain that? I don't think anybody can. But, Carter Hart has carried this team. If you voted for the MVP right now, he would win in a landslide. He's 5-0-2, has not lost in regulation, second in the NHL with that .943 save percentage. They cannot get much more out of Carter Hart. And, of course, he's coming off two poor seasons. His first two seasons were very good, and there was some concern going into the season. Which Carter Hart will we see? Will we see the one that looked like he was blossoming and going to be among the elite in the NHL? That was his first 2 years. Or is he somebody that maybe played over his head and came down to earth in years 3 and 4? Well, I think we can all agree that Carter Hart we're seeing now looks like the Carter Hart of the first 2 years, looks like the Carter Hart who dominated in junior, and looks like one of the NHL's elite goaltenders. So Carter Hart, to me, has been the number one positive in this year. Another positive has been Travis Konecny and Kevin Hayes. They both were kind of put on notice before the year by John Tortorella, by the GM Chuck Fletcher. They've responded to the challenge. They're the number 1 and 2 scorers on the Flyers heading into Wednesday, and they've shown great leadership. So props to Travis Konecny and Kevin Hayes to respond the way they have, and they've shouldered a lot of the load in the early season. Another positive is Tony DeAngelo. I must admit he he has played much better than I expected, especially on the defensive end. He had some problems. He has had some defensive problems in the past, but he has actually stabilized Ivan Provorov. Provorov is off to his best start in several years, and D'Angelo has also helped the power play. I think we all expected that, but 7 points in 9 games, and Tony D'Angelo has played with a lot of poise back there, and he's been a better player, I know, than I expected. So real good start for Tony D'Angelo. I like the way he handled the boos that were thrown his way in Madison Square Garden last night. Of course, he left the Rangers on not so good terms, but as I said, he played with poise last night. He played over 25 minutes, was very active in both ends, and he's off to a terrific start. I also want to mention the fourth line. They've only been together for 2 games now, this combination of Lucas Sedlak, who, of course, they got on waivers from Colorado, Wade Allison on the right wing, Sedlak in the middle, and Nick Delorier on the left side. They've shown some good things. I really like the identity that they're forging. John Tortorella said he may make some changes in the lineup for the Toronto game, just because he had a lot of tired legs from the Rangers game on Tuesday. I hope he keeps that line intact, though. I think they've done some real good things. So a lot of positives for the Flyers, as you can imagine, when you're 5-2-2. Some people might say it's with smoke and mirrors, but hey, they're getting it done. Despite a lot of flaws, despite a lot of players being out of the lineup because of injuries. Negatives, there are a handful of negatives. As I said, they're getting outshot almost every game, putting way too much pressure on Carter Hart. They were outshot 36-19 by the Rangers, and they were outchanced as far as shot attempts, 73-40. A goalie just can't sustain that pressure game in and game out. The previous game, they were outshot badly by Carolina, and the game before that, Florida outshot them 51-22, and the Flyers somehow won that game. So you cannot. You're playing with fire here. You cannot give up that many shots, and a lot of them are quality shots. It's not like all these shots were from the outside, from the perimeter. You cannot give up so many shots and expect to go on another 5-2-2 run. You're putting way too much pressure on Carter Hart. I'm guessing Felix Sandstrom gets a start in Toronto just because Carter Hart has to be exhausted. He was under siege. That said, John Tortorella told us, I guess about 3 weeks ago, that he's not against starting a goalie in back-to-back games, not at all. So I think we will see Carter Hart in a lot of back-to-back games this year, but I do not think that's going to happen Wednesday. We'll see how that plays out. But getting outshot, outchanced almost every game, that has to stop. That's certainly a negative. Another negative to me, Morgan Frost and Noah Cates, they're both off to slow starts. The Flyers really need them and a lot of players to step up this year. Noah Cates was terrific in a late-season call-up last year. Morgan Frost, this is a show-me year. He had 2 goals in the opener. I believe one of them was an empty netter. But, he's had some good moments this year defensively in the corners. And Noah Cates has had some good moments too. But they do need a little more production from those guys if they're going to establish themselves and if the Flyers are going to be able to replicate this 5-2-2 start, in 9 or 10 game segments as you go on down the road. Tonight is the 10th game. Another negative, falling behind. The Flyers have been chasing the game, and again, that's not a recipe for wins, yet they have a 5-2-2 record. They have fallen behind in 8 of 9 games. That cannot happen. And lastly, as far from my perspective, the next negative is injuries. The injuries have been the key players, but the injury update that we received last week on Sean Couturier, that he had another back surgery, that was devastating. He's going to miss at least 3 to 4 months, and more likely, I kind of think they'll shut him down for the season. Maybe they'll give him a look-see in the last month or so, just to give him some confidence going into next year. But The fact that he's going to miss a majority of this season really changes the makeup of this team. And Kevin Hayes is now the number one center. He's probably better slotted at number two. And if he's at two, then you can have either Lawton or Frost or somebody else as a three. It also gives you flexibility to put Lawton on wing, where I think he's a better player. So it just fouls up the lineup with Sean Couturier out. But we wish Sean all the best. And as I mentioned the story the other day, the most important thing is that Sean Couturier can live a normal life and do normal things. You never know with the back. Is his career in jeopardy? The Flyers don't think so, but you just never know with the back. So, but as you can see, there are a lot more positives right now after the first month of the season than negatives. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, you would have taken that before the season started. 5-2-2, a lot of positives. The young kids are playing a lot. I like that. And John Tortorella, I can't say enough about the job he's done. And but we'll be back after a short break. We're going to go with our question and answer period, and we'll be back with our Broad Street podcast right after this. Thanks again for joining us on our Broad Street Bullcast. This is episode 15, and hope you're enjoying it on either YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or whatever your favorite platform is. And we're at our question and answer period, my favorite part of the show, and I appreciate all the questions we got from the loyal Flyers followers. Let's jump right into it. Phil Czechia asks, how much is Torts responsible for Carter Hart's early good play? Good question, Phil, but I would have to say Torts, with all due respect, does not have much responsibility at all, because when we talk to Torts about Carter Hart or Felix Sandstrom or anybody, any of the goalies in the system, he always refers us to Kim Dillabow, and he admits that he has blinders on when the goalies are concerned. He really doesn't pay much attention to them in practice, and he has a lot of trust in Kim Dillabow. And I will say this, I think Carter Hart, I don't know if it's what exactly happened in the offseason, but he seems a lot more mature, a lot more focused. And I'm talking about not only on the ice, but off the ice. And I think that translates to his play. He just seems very confident, very sure of himself. I think he has the swagger back. And, maybe a little bit of a few technical changes. Maybe they have been incorporated by Kim Dillabow. But I think more than anything, it's the mindset. Carter Hart really believes in himself right now. You can see it in his body language on the ice. So, but good question, Phil. Really appreciate it. Jake Webster asks, who is the biggest unsung hero through the first month of the season? And he says if you exclude Carter Hart, of course, has been the MVP in the first month of the Flyers season. Good question, Jake. I would say there are a couple candidates. Tony DeAngelo has steadied the power play. He steadied Ivan Provorov and his play. He's chipped in with 7 points in his first 9 games and played pretty well defensively. So DeAngelo is a candidate. I think Scott Lawton, as far as an unsung candidate, he's done everything expected, and he's even wearing the A, the only alternate captain on the Flyers right now. He has scored 3 goals in the first 9 games and has done well in faceoffs, plays with grit. So, I think he's an unsung hero, and I think he's become a favorite of John Tortorella, too, with the way he plays. Tortorella wasn't as familiar with Lawton, of course, when he came here, but he loves his play, and he's always complimenting Lawton for what he does out there on the ice. Next question comes from Harris Lacey. He asks, based on some of Tort's comments and diminished playing times in games, how long do you think Torts will go with Morgan Frost? Do you think he'll have a short leash with Morgan Frost? How long before he's playing in the minor leagues? I don't think he'll have a short leash. There may be some times where Morgan Frost is benched for a game or two to give him a different perspective of the game. They do not have a lot of depth at center in the minors. Jackson Cates, for example, is not an upgrade and doesn't have anywhere near the potential of Morgan Frost. And, of course, Morgan Frost would also have to clear waivers if you sent him down to the Phantoms. I'm not so sure he would clear. I know Kiefer Bellows, he was at one time a highly regarded prospect, was drafted 19th overall in the first round of his draft. He did clear waivers, so you might look at that and say, well, Frost is going to clear. But Frost has a lot of potential. We see it sometimes. Not enough. We don't see the consistency, but I think they're going to stick with Frost for a while. The potential is there. He does get down on himself probably too much. He's his own worst critic, and he'll tell you that. He tries hard out there. Sometimes I wish he would relax and let the game come to him more and not put so much pressure on himself. This was a guy, of course, who was a tremendous scorer in junior. I don't think anybody expected him to be a 100-point player in the NHL. But I do think, the potential is there to be at least a 50-point scorer, and hopefully we'll start seeing more out of Morgan Frost. But appreciate the question, Harris. Next question comes from Ice Matteo, and he says, who do you think deserves to be the first call-up from the Lehigh Valley Phantoms on offense and defense? Cam York would have been the first call-up on defense if needed. He was injured in the game. A few days ago, they're calling him day-to-day, which with the Flyers, are not so sure what that means. They, of course, had Cam Atkinson as day-to-day on September 25th. They finally changed that designation about a month later and said he was week-to-week. So we'll have to keep a close eye on the health of Cam York, who, as I said, was injured in a game earlier this week, and they're saying it's not serious, but keep a close eye on that. Ronnie Attard, who has played well with the Phantoms, and he certainly is a strong candidate to be called up as well. It may depend if somebody is injured, and if it's somebody on the right side, then Ronnie Attard would probably get the call. If somebody on the left side, it would probably Cam York, again, if he's healthy. And next question comes from Jeff. He says, if the Flyers continue to be successful, will they add anything before the trade deadline? Good question, Jeff, but I really don't see the success lasting. Hate to be a negative Nancy here, but if the success does last, they do have the cap space to add a key player. There are a lot of big names out there, the Patrick Kanes, John, and as a winger, John Klingberg, if you're looking for a defenseman, a guy who isn't so young anymore, but he's like middle-aged, I guess, a winger, Jonathan Drouin, is going to be a free agent after this year, and Montreal may part with him. If you're looking for a center, Bo Horvat will probably be available from Vancouver. The biggest name out there is probably Jacob Chikrin, defenseman at Arizona. But again, it depends on what the Flyers need, who is injured, who's healthy, and of course, if they're in a playoff race, or if it looks like they can be in a playoff race. But right now, I don't, maybe you take a shot at a Drouin, who, is young enough to maybe turn things around. But I don't really see them taking a shot at a veteran guy, like a Patrick Kane. Jacob Chikrin would certainly fit in tremendously here, but, the pieces would have to fit. If you send like a Rasmus Ristolainen and a draft pick there, then I'm all for it. But, he's going to be very, very costly. Next question comes from FF Andrew Tate. He asks, is there a direct correlation between the Flyers' success in the early part of this season and Claude Giroux's departure? And he says, this is the best I've seen the Flyers play in years. Direct correlation, my short answer is no. The Flyers started 5-2-1 this year. They also started 5-2-1 last year when Giroux was there. They also started 5-2-1 the previous year when Giroux was there. So I don't really see a correlation there. Giroux is 34 now, and he's off to a real good start with Ottawa. And by the way, the Flyers will play in Ottawa on Saturday. But again, my short answer is no there. But I appreciate the question. Blue Velvet Garfield asks, he says, with all the injuries to Couture and Tort's preference for grit and versatile players, do you see Scott Lawton as the next captain? He's probably the leader in the clubhouse right now. As I mentioned earlier, he's the only guy wearing an A. He's the alternate captain. That says a lot for him, and it says how much John Tortorella likes his play, likes his demeanor, likes what he does on the ice. To me, it was almost a no-brainer if Couture wasn't hurt. I think he deserves to be captain. And you talked about grit with the question, and I think that Couture certainly plays with a lot of grit. So I think Couture would be, a favorite in John Tortorella's eyes if and when he comes back this year. We still don't know. They estimate 3 to 4 months, but I think that may be a little optimistic. I think if Couture comes back, I'll say this, if he comes back later this year, so let's just say he plays 6-8 weeks, I think that will maybe cloud the issue a little bit because I think Torts will become a big fan of the way Couture plays. If he doesn't come back, I think there's a good chance that Lawton then would be the captain next year. We'll see how that plays out, but Tortorella has said he probably will not pick a captain for this year, so probably won't have one until the 2023-24 season. But I appreciate the question. Next question comes from Robbie Rhodes. After a good start of the season, I'm still having doubts about this club. Where do you see them in the standings when Thanksgiving rolls around? Rob, I see them maybe a few games under 500. I don't think this team is a playoff team, despite the strong start. But I think they're a lot more competitive, a lot more fun to watch than last year. That's a credit to the players. That's a credit to Tortorella. He's got them playing harder. He's got them into the game more and with less talent. Remember, at this time last year, you had Couture in the beginning of the season. You had Claude Giroux in the beginning of the season. Big difference this year is you're playing a lot more younger players. You're developing younger players, and I think that's a real good thing. I think, that was the way to go. And, this is a transition year, and, next year you're going to have a lot more cap space. And, this is a year for the players to grow, the young players to grow, and most importantly for Carter Hart to grow. And it's a real encouraging start for this team. Not just that they're 5-2-2, but that the young guys are gaining the experience, gaining playing time, gaining the trust of John Tortorella. And to me, as mentioned earlier, the biggest plus is Carter Hart right now because he looks again like he's going to be one of the elite goaltenders in the NHL. But I appreciate the question, Rob, and I appreciate all the great questions from our listeners. Thank you for submitting them. And I want to thank my son, also named Sam, for producing. He does a great job. Enjoy the game on Saturday against Claude Giroux and the Ottawa Senators. That game is on the road. Enjoy the rest of the drama in the Phillies-Houston Astros World Series. And as the late, great Gene Hart was fond to sing, good night and good hockey.